Japan, Saudi Arabia, Russia, they're all selling or have sold their treasuries, and they are buying gold instead of treasuries, which has outperformed the bond market, has outperformed the S&P 500, has no counterparty risk, cannot be sanctioned, and I think is being remonetized across the globe. The world understands what gold truly is, an asset free from counterparty liability. So yes, I do believe that the supremacy is on the way out. It is not something that will happen immediately until it does. That's why I'm a fan of the phrase logarithmic decay. Little by little by little by little by little by little, then bang.
In one of its latest reports about central bank gold accumulation, the World Gold Council reported that central banks increased their global official gold reserves by 39 tons in January. This was more than double the revised December net purchases of 17 tons, and it marked the 8th consecutive month of net purchases. 6 central banks, the Central Bank of Turkey, the People's Bank of China, the Reserve Bank of India, the National Bank of Kazakhstan, the Central Bank of Jordan, and the Czech National Bank, increased their gold reserves in January, as they have done frequently over the past year or so. The Central Bank of Turkey was the largest buyer, as it increased its official gold holdings by 12 tons in January. The People's Bank of China added 10 tons to its reserves, increasing its total gold holdings to 2,245 tons. With these activities in the first month of the year, the Council expects that 2024 will be another solid year of central bank gold demand. According to Andy Schectman, the president of Miles Franklin Precious Metals, the trend of central banks buying record amounts of gold is a huge deal, but it is an even bigger deal when you realize that the record gold purchase is supported by a record reduction in their US Treasury holdings. Central banks like the People's Bank of China, one of the biggest foreign holders of US Treasury bonds, are rapidly reducing their Treasury holding and consistently advocating for the end of the current unipolar global system. In a recent interview with Lena Petrova, Andy explains that central banks will soon not be the only category of investors voraciously accumulating gold. He predicts that gold prices will increase even more sharply when that begins, easily surpassing $3,000 per ounce before the year ends. We will present clips from Andy's interview. As we do, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
I think what is behind this surge in accumulation of gold, really, you could lay it at the feet of the West and their weaponization of the dollar. And, you know, if we go back to the previous crisis, 2008 and 9, really the central banks were just beginning to, or the gold market itself was just beginning to ramp up till it reached its peak in 2011. But it was a very, very different time in 2008. And for example, the Fed had a balance sheet in 2008 of, I don't know, $700 or $800 million, not the $9 trillion that we saw it get ramped up to here over the last few years. But I think what's really behind the accumulation of gold, there are a few things. Number one, in 2019, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank on the planet, the central banker's central bank, they reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. And, you know, our media doesn't just do a poor job of telling us what's happening, they do no job. How many people really know that gold was reclassified tier 1? Since the end of World War II and Bretton Woods, there's been dollars and treasuries as tier 1 assets. And then there's gold. After 75 years nearly of it just being dollars and treasuries, why would the central bank, the most powerful bank on the planet, reclassify gold as tier 1? And interestingly enough, if you go back 2 years before that to 2017, you know, when nobody wanted any gold, when people just wanted Bitcoin and you know, S&P 500 and buying Airbnbs to, you know, real estate all over the country to turn into investment houses, no one was buying any gold. And in fact, in 2017, most of the sales that the industry was receiving were people selling, not buying. It was a very unusual time. But that's when the German Bundesbank made a very big deal about repatriating their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of England. And within a few months of that happening, the Bank of Turkey, Hungary, Poland, the Czech National Bank, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Austria, all of these Eastern European banks said, yeah, we want our gold back too, by the way. And they said the same thing to the Bank of England. And in 2018, those same banks, who had most of which had been net sellers over the previous several years, bought more gold as a group than they did in the previous 60 years combined. In 2019, those numbers were almost up 100% by those same players. And then, lo and behold, it must have just been a coincidence. The BIS said, oh, by the way, gold is now a tier one asset. Makes you wonder, were they told, get your house in order, repatriate your gold and start buying it? Here we go. And this has been a trend ever since that is accelerating. And yeah, as you were saying, 2022 was a huge year, and 2023 was as well. In fact, over the last 2.5 years, the central banks have bought more gold than at any time in history. And when you have a central bank like the United States Federal Reserve, and the U.S. government, who find it appropriate to weaponize the dollar as the world reserve currency, it creates very, very, very big problems. And big problems in the respect that much of the world views us as being hypocritical. Where, for example, we can give $200 billion to the Ukraine, but Janet Yellen just does an interview with CNBC and saying, we have now warned China, we have put them on notice that if they give any money whatsoever, even though they're charter members of BRICS and allies, if they give any money to Russia to aid in their war efforts with the Ukraine, we will not only sanction their companies and their banks, but also Beijing itself.
Andy explains that US Treasuries haven't done much for over 2 decades because of suppressed interest rates. In contrast, the gold market has outperformed it tremendously because central banks know that gold is an asset that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. It has no sanction risk, no risk of confiscation or default risk, and it has proved its value for thousands of years. Andy believes these are the reasons why gold is swiftly replacing US Treasury bonds. At the moment, only central banks and a few other institutional investors. However, as the decay becomes more obvious, Andy says even retail investors will begin to accumulate gold at record levels when it all begins. Let's get back to the video.
Interesting thing about this too, Lena, gold's been rising in the face of a rising dollar and positive real interest rates, positive real return, if you believe the CPI. I mean, really, you should, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we should take the L out of it. It should be the BS, because we know that the CPI omits many of the things that are actually inflating. But if we take it for what it's worth, a strong dollar and a positive real return typically would be kryptonite to gold, yet we find it continuing to move forward. And in terms of, is this the end of the dollar's supremacy? I would argue, like I said, its hegemony is gone, because, I guess we have to make a definition. What makes the dollar the world reserve currency? Now, it used to be backed by gold after World War II, but as we all remember our history lesson, all the gold was getting bled out of the treasury when de Gaulle from France called our bluff and said, look, there's more dollars being created than there are gold bars backing it. So he sent warships over to New York Harbor filled with dollars and said, please give us the gold. And we did. And that's when Nixon closed the gold window. But it was 3 years later in 73, well, 2.5 years later in 73, when we dispatched Henry Kissinger to Saudi Arabia to strike a deal with the Saudis, and he did. And the deal was, we'll protect you, and no one will ever mess with you again. We'll provide munitions and training and support. Before that, you and OPEC, by extension, will value oil in dollars. It has been the petrodollar, we will call Bretton Woods 2, loosely, where it was our protection of the Saudi kingdom, and by extension, OPEC, that has given us the synthetic demand, the hegemony, the supremacy. And when you weaponize the dollar, and when you realize the lead economic advisor to the United States government, a man named Jared Bernstein, his entire thesis is to lose the reserve status. He's written reports on it called Dethrone King Dollar. He's been interviewed in the Washington Post when Trump slapped tariffs on China. Great, he says, we'll lose the reserve status, maybe. His whole thesis is that it's a privilege we can no longer afford. So, could it be that they actually have thought this through, in the respect that the first thing they did, in essence, after stopping the Keystone Pipeline, was to sign an executive order to go green? Now, look, I got 3 kids. I mean, I want my kids to grow up with clean water and clean air and in a great environment and ecology. But to do this to Saudi Arabia in that perspective, to tell them, hey, listen, thanks for the memories, you guys, but we're going green. It's the protection of the Saudi kingdom and our relationship to the petrodollar that gives us the hegemony. So could it be that they're actually thinking to themselves, hey, let's go green and then weaponize the dollar and we'll see how well that goes? My point to you is that the rest of the world, at least the Southern Hemisphere, is looking at this country as hypocritical. And they're looking at this country as one that is moving away from the petrodollar. And indeed, we have been seeing, for the last year plus, all of these countries in the BRICS who, a lot of people were bummed that they didn't come out with a common settlement currency in August. I'm not, and they may not do it in October. They probably will, but maybe not. But it was Sergei Glaziev who has told us for 3 years that there will be a common settlement currency that will be a basket of commodities and will be a basket of currencies. Now, I want to talk to you about that in a little bit, but suffice it to say, what they've been doing instead before they've issued it, because last year they said, hey, you guys, listen, go back to the drawing board, come and present your findings in Russia in October. And in the meantime, let's all trade in local currencies. Here's where the hegemony has been shattered. You're seeing this everywhere. Brazil buying corn or selling corn and soybeans to China for yuan.
According to the World Gold Council's recent central bank gold survey, the apex banks are accumulating gold due to its value in crisis response, diversification attributes, and store of value credentials. This trend, when viewed in conjunction with Western metals suppression and Eastern accumulation, hints at a potential shift from the fiat debt-based system to a more superior commodities-backed system. Andy believes many of the events of the past few years are directly linked to what's happening right now. From the excessive money printing during the pandemic to the often hypocritical sanctions levied against countries like Iran and Russia for crimes that the United States has done far worse without repercussions. All of these countries are weary of Western dominance over the rest of the world. But most importantly, they recognize the vulnerability of the United States economy, and by extension, the Western world, to be overthrown without much of a challenge. Andy believes this is the endgame, and we are drawing so much closer to it every time another country dumps more US Treasury and buys more gold. Every time the Federal Reserve prints, it further weakens the dollar and investors' faith in the United States. Every time there is another hike in Treasury yields to attract buyers because investors are showing less and less interest, we draw closer and closer to that endgame. The solution, he adds, is to buy more gold and silver now, because there might come a time when there's no more gold or silver left to purchase. What are your thoughts on Andy Schectman's interview? Please drop your comments and observations in the comment section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos. Thanks for watching.